the story of gambling with lives. The Flight MT-271 tragedy. Flight MT-271, a mammoth of the sky, lifted off from the bustling metropolis of Samsara, bearing hundreds of dreams and hopes across the vast expanse of Asia, towards a small yet thriving city in Central Europe. The passenger cabin was a microcosm of life. In the business class, a group of suited professionals was huddled, engrossed in a heated discussion. They were on the brink of a deal that would alter the trajectory of their venture. A few seats away, a woman nervously rehearsed her presentation, her first international seminar as a guest speaker. Further back, a group of enthusiastic backpackers swapped stories of their travels, their voices buzzing with excitement and wanderlust. Among them was a solo traveler, a young woman on a journey of self-discovery. In another corner, a family with young children was heading for a reunion. The youngest, a girl no older than 6, clutched her doll and listened, wide-eyed, as her older brother spun tales about their cousin in Europe who could supposedly speak 5 languages. Amidst all these, an elderly lady sat, observing her fellow passengers. Mrs. Lim had been a frequent flyer for decades, but she had never seen a flight crew member like the co-pilot. Something about the young man's demeanor unsettled her. Was it his forced smile, the distant look in his eyes, or the tremble in his hand as he passed her to her seat? The flight progressed as any other. Dinner was served, movies were watched, and the cabin lights were dimmed. Yet Mrs. Lim couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling. As she gazed out into the dark sky, she wondered about the strange unease the co-pilot had stirred in her. Inside the expansive hull of Flight MT-271, passengers were settling into their seats, some comfortably leaning back to nap, others engaging in eager conversation, while a few were busy fussing over the onboard entertainment system. A typical beginning to a long-haul flight. Among them were the Lee siblings, Amy and Tim. Amy, a fiercely independent journalist, was returning home after a 2-year assignment. Tim, an overworked corporate executive, was on a much-needed vacation. In the aisle across, a mother was humming a lullaby to her newborn, her weary eyes filled with a quiet, indescribable love. Nearby, a group of retired friends on a tour of Europe were laughing over shared memories, their faces alight with the promise of new adventures. In the business class section, hushed conversations filled the air, punctuated by the clink of glassware. 2 business partners were finalizing a deal that had the potential to change their lives forever. They worked meticulously, going over every detail of the agreement, oblivious to the world around them. A couple of rows back, a young backpacker was excitedly recounting her adventures in Asia, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of the unknown. Her stories, filled with local anecdotes and strange encounters, brought occasional chuckles from the elderly gentleman seated beside her. In the quiet of the first-class cabin, a woman named Mrs. Kwan observed the people around her with an intent gaze. Something felt off. She noticed the co-pilot, a man in his mid-30s, looking strangely tense as he passed through the cabin, his eyes distant and troubled. She shook off the uneasy feeling and decided to nap, dismissing it as the result of too many detective novels. As the flight continued, laughter, shared stories, and the occasional cry of a baby filled the cabin. The atmosphere was lively, the passengers a mosaic of lives intersecting at this moment, unbeknownst to the approaching tragedy. A routine check-in was made, and the cabin lights dimmed. Outside, the moon shone brightly, a silent companion to Flight MT-271 soaring over the vast, empty ocean. Little did anyone know that it was the last peaceful moment they were to have, but the plane carried on, forging its way through the night sky. The faint humming of its engines, a lullaby to the stories unfolding within its walls. As the hum of the engines lulled the plane into a peaceful rhythm, life stories continued to unfurl within the cabin's confines. MI and Tim delved into a rare heart-to-heart. Amy sharing her war zone, reporting experiences, intertwined with profound emotions, fear, exhilaration, and the sense of purpose she felt in the midst of chaos. Tim, in turn, confided about his grueling corporate life, the stress, the politics, and the disillusionment of living a life unfulfilled. Their conversation, raw and heartfelt, brought them closer, healing old wounds of sibling rivalry. In the economy section, the mother cradled her newborn close, her mind drifting back to the quaint town she was leaving behind. Her husband, she recalled with a bitter pang, had been seduced by the allure of urban life. She remembered his gentle assurances of a bright future, the conviction in his eyes. She was not as optimistic, but she decided to brave the journey for their child's sake. The group of retirees were in the middle of a boisterous game of cards, their laughter filling the cabin. Their shared memories dated back to their school days, their lives intertwined in a rich tapestry of friendship and shared experiences. Their trip was a celebration of their lifelong bond, an adventure they had dreamed of since their youth. His partners, in the throes of their negotiation, looked on the verge of a breakthrough. Their fervor was palpable, their eyes glowing with the anticipated triumph. Little did they know that their dream deal would remain unfulfilled. The young backpacker was scribbling furiously in her journal, documenting every bit of her journey. The elderly gentleman, taken by her tales, started sharing stories of his youth, his voice echoing the wisdom of years and the sparkle of past adventures. In the quiet corner of the first-class cabin, Mrs. Kwan couldn't shake off her unease. She noticed the co-pilot again. His brows furrowed, his gaze distant. His demeanor was remarkably odd for a man entrusted with so many lives. She pondered whether to voice her concerns but hesitated, not wanting to create unnecessary panic. Meanwhile, an unexpected turbulence shook the plane, a ripple in the serene rhythm of the journey. Passengers held onto their seats, faces taut with fleeting anxiety. The seatbelt signs lit up, and a reassuring announcement from the cockpit eased their nerves. The plane steadied. But the uneasy undercurrent lingered, a stark contrast to the camaraderie and lively conversation that had filled the cabin moments ago. Unbeknownst to the passengers, the flight's tranquil routine was about to be shattered. Gradually, the initial unease dissipated. Still, the thought of a worried elderly woman aboard was a nagging itch she chose to ignore. Many passengers on long-haul flights appear frazzled or disturbed. It's not unusual. Meanwhile, within the aircraft's cabin, other passengers were absorbed in their flight experiences. A family with 2 young children was trying to pass time, resorting to all kinds of stretching games. The businessmen in the first row were engaged in discussions with their partners via video conferences, trying to stay focused despite the long flight hours. But it wasn't all work. A young tourist couple busied themselves, planning their continued vacation, poring over maps and guidebooks, talking in soft but excited tones. They left their world of serenity and travel, the culture, and restaurants they loved, eager to discover what awaited them next, especially after the thrill of planning such an intriguing journey. So, with the flight's elapsed time over the open sea, the shared, exhilarating time of passengers suddenly neared its end. Beyond the sense of calm enveloping the plane, each of the passengers was oblivious to the impending disaster. Suddenly, the tranquility of flight MT-271's cabin was shattered. The plane lurched violently, causing passengers to shriek in terror. Overhead compartments flung open, sending luggage tumbling down onto the aisle. The flight attendants, despite their best efforts to stay composed, mirrored the panic on the passengers' faces. In the cockpit, First Officer Marcus was gripping the yoke tightly, the veins in his forehead pulsating with strain. He was forcing the plane into a steep descent, his face a mask of grim determination. Captain Lee, realizing what was happening, grappled with him, trying to regain control. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted over the screaming alarms. But Marcus didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the sprawling ocean rapidly approaching them. Back in the cabin, parents were clutching their children, couples holding each other. The businessmen who were previously laughing over whiskey were now sending frantic text messages, hoping against hope that their last words would reach their loved ones. Beneath them, the ocean roared, waves rising to meet the plummeting giant. Desperate communications surged between the cockpit and the ground control, their voices echoing through the headset of a stunned radio operator. But it was all in vain. The colossal aircraft, like a wounded beast, roared defiantly as it raced towards the water. Its passengers clung to each other, their screams swallowed by the roar of the engines and the wailing wind. The dread was so palpable it could almost be tasted. The once lively chatter and laughter had been replaced by terror, and the comfortable seats turned into mere cushions before an executioner's block. In the cockpit, the co-pilot gripped the controls with white knuckles. His breath was ragged, a mixture of determination and desperation. His hands trembled, but his eyes were unwavering, staring out at the rapidly approaching ocean. The pilot fought back, struggling to regain control, but the co-pilot's iron grip couldn't be broken. The last thing they saw was the terrifying rush of the ocean's surface before everything went black. The plane hit the water at breakneck speed, breaking apart on impact and sinking rapidly. The tranquility of the ocean depths was disturbed by the wreckage and bodies sinking into the abyss. In the aftermath of the tragedy, as the world mourned the lost souls of flight, MT-271, an unsettling discovery was made. In the small apartment of First Officer Marcus, the investigators found a safe. Inside was a sealed envelope, and within it, a confession that sent chills down their spines. "I am sorry. I had no way out. I am a man ruined by my own vices." The letter began. It went on to detail Marcus's struggle with gambling addiction, the $1.5 million debt that was swallowing him, the threats from loan sharks, the shame of impending ruin, and ultimately, his decision to end it all in the most dramatic way he knew. The world reeled from the revelation. Flight MT-271 wasn't brought down by a catastrophic mechanical failure or a terrorist act. It was the result of a desperate man's despair. The victims' families were left grappling with the knowledge that their loved ones were casualties of one man's secret battle against his own demons. In the heart of every individual who boarded Flight MT-271 were stories of life, love, and aspirations. And in its tragic end, a stark reminder of human frailty, a testament to the unpredictable, inexplicable nature of human suffering. A town in Central Europe waited in vain for the arrival of Flight MT-271, and a city in Eastern Asia mourned the departure that had become a farewell. The grand aircraft, a marvel of human achievement, met its end, not in the skies it was designed to conquer, but in the unforgiving depths of the ocean, carrying with it a grim secret and 259 untold stories. The investigation that followed was a whirlwind of theories, accusations, and heart-wrenching revelations. A dedicated team was assembled, tasked with piecing together the dreadful puzzle. Within days, divers retrieved the aircraft's black box, its silent presence a grim reminder of the flight's tragic end. The data recovered painted a terrifying picture of the last moments. But it was not until they uncovered a shocking piece of evidence that the heart of the mystery was revealed. Inside a safe at the co-pilot's home, investigators found a letter. A confession, really. The once crisp, white envelope was slightly worn at the edges, indicative of frequent handling. The co-pilot's handwriting was shaky but legible. In it, he confessed his gambling addiction, the mountain of debt he had accrued. There was a tone of remorse in his words, not for what he had done, but for the life he had wasted. It painted the picture of a desperate man driven over the edge by self-loathing and guilt. A man who saw no other way out. He had left no note for his family, only a simple request. "Tell them I'm sorry." The news sent shockwaves around the world. The co-pilot who was responsible for the lives of hundreds was in truth a broken man, struggling with his demons. His desperate act had not only ended his life, but had also taken the lives of hundreds of innocent people. The Flight MT-271 catastrophe became a symbol of a disturbing reality. The veneer of safety, professionalism, and control so often associated with aviation was shattered. This revelation shook people's faith in an industry whose promise was to bring people together, not tear them apart. The untold stories of those lost in the disaster lingered, leaving a profound impact on the psyche of the world. The tragedy of Flight MT-271 was a chilling testament to the fact that we rarely know what battles people are fighting within. The co-pilot's actions were inexcusable, but his story served as a harsh reminder of the importance of addressing mental health, especially in fields where lives are at stake. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the National Aviation Safety Board made an unprecedented recommendation. They suggested that all airlines should conduct polygraph tests every 6 months for every pilot and co-pilot. The aim was not to pry into the personal lives of these professionals, but to ensure that they were not involved in activities that could potentially compromise their capacity to safely perform their duties, such as gambling, substance abuse, or any form of reckless lifestyle. This proposal, of course, sparked heated debates across various sectors. Civil rights groups argued it was a breach of privacy, an invasive measure that did not guarantee absolute safety. On the other hand, the majority of the public, still reeling from the shock of the MT-271 catastrophe, saw it as a necessary step towards preventing similar incidents. Despite the controversy, the proposal gained traction. Some airlines, prioritizing passenger safety above all else, voluntarily adopted the recommendations. The industry gradually began to shift towards a more comprehensive approach to crew assessment. Besides technical skills, attention was now given to psychological and mental health aspects, acknowledging their crucial role in aviation safety. In the face of such an unimaginable disaster, changes were inevitable. The story of Flight MT-271 served as a harsh lesson, a tragic reminder that the aviation industry, like all human endeavors, was not immune to the effects of personal hardships and mental health struggles. The co-pilot's actions on that fateful flight led to a paradigm shift, forever changing how the world perceived aviation safety. And so, in its terrible wake, the flight did leave behind a legacy. It was a legacy of change, of heightened awareness, and of the realization that in the quest for ensuring safety, human frailty could not be ignored. The victims of Flight MT-271 did not die in vain. Their tragic end served as the catalyst for a new era of aviation safety measures, one that sought to safeguard not just the body, but also the mind. The flight was not just a journey between two geographical points. It was a flight into the abyss, a journey into the darkness of the human mind, an exploration of desperation and despair. And as the years passed, the number MT-271 became not just a flight number, but a symbol of a tragedy that should never be forgotten. In the end, the story of Flight MT-271 was a tale of despair and tragedy, a haunting reminder of the hidden turmoil that can lurk behind even the most professional facade. And though the physical wreckage was eventually retrieved from the ocean's depths, the emotional wreckage left in the wake of the disaster would linger for decades to come. If you liked the story of gambling with lives, the Flight MT-271 tragedy, please hit the like button, share it, and subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you'll be the first to receive our fascinating upcoming stories. Thank you.